Hey, I'm Billy Stokes. This is my journey of building our business, but without compromising the relationships with people I love. Follow along while I document my growth. This is all BS. Okay, so I am here with my 13-day-old son. Bec's having a nap, so we might have some gnarly background noise and we may or may not even be interrupted, but we'll just see how far we get. So yeah, I wanted to kind of go right back to the very genesis of our business, because I would say that's really where our development started. Like, there's definitely been a correlation between our personal growth, and our okay. Well, here's what I was going to say is that there's the more responsibility you take on, the more you grow, and the more you reveal yourself to yourself, and all these sorts of things. So, for me, the two best personal development programs I've ever been through is business and parenthood. I heard this quote. It said, "Parenting is only hard for good parents." Like, if you find it hard, that's good. Because you actually have a standard. And I think that's important to understand as well. So I think our journey kind of starts well before that. But the business was always in mind. And when I think around, both Bec and I, our upbringing was, both our parents were entrepreneurial to some degree. I know that Bec's parents were, or her father especially, tried a variety of different industries, much like myself. Dabbled in tons of different industries. My father didn't dabble in as many industries, but certainly always new ideas, very, very creative, with especially spotting gaps in markets, which I think that certainly seems to be something that I've inherited to a degree. Sorry about that. So I think that's kind of been in our DNA. Now, just on that real quick, I don't want, whether it's my kids or someone else listening to this, I don't want anyone to think that to glean from our journey you need to have an entrepreneurial influence. I think that kind of comes from the beliefs and the stories we tell ourselves. And so I certainly, I think that if you were to be placed into the full, your DNA, your epigenetics, your influences, but you were just placed in a family of Richard Branson, would you be entrepreneurial? Yeah, definitely. There'd have to be an element of entrepreneurship there. So I think a lot of our trajectory is really based on our familial, social, institutional, political, cultural influences, and that if we had other influences, would probably be in a different position. So I say all that to say that if someone's listening to this and goes, oh well, writes themselves off, well, I'd just check your assumptions, because I think often if you play a thought experiment that is a little bit challenging, then oftentimes you can kind of debunk your own myths. So I certainly don't want our story to be anything that kind of hinders anyone. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight that. So, so harking back to our upbringing was that, I had my eye on Bec very early in the piece. I fancied her for quite a while before I made any moves, and just the way things lined up was just, she was away and I was away, and I was living in New Zealand and she was living in Perth, and all these sorts of things that never really lined up. But one thing that was for certain was that I really wanted to get into the cafe scene at some point. And Bec at the time was training, doing her apprenticeship in hospitality under an incredible chef. Absolutely one of the best in WA. And that set like a really, really great foundation. So I was in the photography space at the time. That was just, that was the door that opened to me earliest when I was in my early youth. And I was met with a lot of great mentors, a lot of great opportunities. And I'm very, very grateful for that. And it's funny how things pan out, hey, because the lessons that I learned through contracting, through working for myself, even having to starting to understand how to manage your own books from a business standpoint using accounting software, Albeit when I was really young, like 14, 15, starting to really understand the nuances of people in business and, what's expected and how to actually do that well. Oh, I think back to sometimes I completely ballsed up, hey, just immaturity and times, if I'm to be really truly honest, there were times where I look back and I just go, God, like I wouldn't have given myself a crack had I done that. Finally, actually, I reached out to, this is probably about maybe 18 months ago, 2 years ago. There's this photographer who gave me an absolute, like, silver platted me an opportunity. We'd kind of been working together, and she had a contract for Silver Lake, and she was moving town, and it was really lucrative, and here I was like 16, 17, 16 or 17 or something. Actually, yeah, it must have been about 16. And she wasn't necessarily a mentor per se, but she had like well, I certainly gleaned a lot of wisdom and experience from her. And I remember it just was in the back of my mind for so long, for years, literally like a decade, over a decade. And I just felt this immense guilt because it was scary for me to go from, like, contracting to the local paper, doing a few family shoots, those sorts of things, to then, like, going and contracting to a publicly listed company. Like, that was crazy. So I shat the bed. What happened was she teed up a time, and I just flaked. I did not talk to her, and I was like, God. Anyway, yeah, about 18 months ago, I found her. This is so funny. Like, I was nearly 30 by the time I resolved this. It's so embarrassing. So I reached out to her and I just said, I was like, hey, listen, like, you probably don't even know me. Don't know if you remember this. Because to me, I'm like, man, I full stitched this girl up. Like she was genuinely wanting to do something really great. And, yeah, so I emailed her. I was like, hey, listen, I'm really sorry. Like, here's the circumstance. Rah, rah, rah. And she replied to me being like, hey, Billy, I have no memory of this. It was really great. Just be like, wow, and I think one of the lessons that I've learned over time is that, you're the protagonist in your own story, and all these things that happen to you are so big because it's you, and no one else cares. Like, I shut the bed. Cool. She moved on with her life. Someone else probably got the contract, or the contract stopped. Who knows? And I missed out on an opportunity. So that was something that I would say, for the most part, I've learned from that. Like, I'm certainly someone who actions courage nowadays, but that was a learned skill, and very early in the piece, it certainly wasn't a skill that I was great at executing on. So, how do we get onto that? I don't even know. Anyway, hospitality. So, yeah, so it was kind of like in the back of my mind for a very long time. The capacity and what it looked like, I wasn't totally sure. I just was saying cafe. Excuse me. I find a lot of people when they talk about, that there's hospitality in cafes and restaurants are kind of romanticized. I have no idea why, because they're a pain in the ass of an industry sometimes. Hey, like, they're fun, really really fun. The pressure is amazing. Like, the adrenaline you get. I remember that was something that Bec was saying after coming out of, like, really high end restaurants. Like, Michelin star sort of caliber. That the one of the things she missed was the adrenaline, and so it's fun. It gets addictive. So it's a fun industry, but bloody hell, it's hard work sometimes. Hey, so I and I say sometimes because it's not always the case. I think that it's very easy for people to say, "Oh, it's hard, it's hard, it's hard," and when they probably make it harder than it needs to be, and that's been my experience at least. So yeah, so anyway, so that was kind of something that was in the back of my mind. And I always thought that I'd get into the cafe scene and the coffee scene. For no particular reason, I just kind of liked it, and this is having not worked in it either. I didn't actually work in a cafe. Oh, no, no, actually, sorry. So I was living in New Zealand. I was over at a Bible college, and I was living in New Zealand. And I started doing a bit of work in the cafes there. However, my interest, I would say, started before then, and I wouldn't say anything that I actually had my sights set on, as much as it was something that was just in the back of my mind. Like, I like this. Or prior to that, I think I might like this. And when I was over in New Zealand, that's kind of when I first started learning. I remember Jan, that was his name. Yanni, that's right. a little German guy, absolute legend. He was the one who really first taught me about coffee, and coffee's certainly changed a lot since then, since between now and then. So yeah, and that was I was 15, so that was I guess my first exposure to working in the cafe scene. Yeah, so that was cool. So that's kind of where it all started, and I think that that the seed was planted, and in my mind, I saw that Beck was a chef and she was in the hospitality space, and I was going, well, that seems to be a bit of a synergy. I quite like her, and it wasn't until we actually started dating that we both discussed, okay, well, obviously you're kind of vetting each other and just working out, well, you know, is there this compatibility? And one of the things was, what do you want to do in the future? And she obviously she's in hospitality. She's just done this apprenticeship or doing this apprenticeship, and one of the things was she wanted to get into a cafe, and I was like, oh, well, that's interesting, and so it was I guess something we kind of parked. It wasn't anything we were going to action straight away, or yeah. So yeah, we just I think that was probably like a vote of confidence, and then I think our relationship just kind of flourished, and it wasn't until our time in Melbourne where we really started to step into that hospitality space with the intent of knowing what we were doing. So, yeah. So I'd say that's that. I'd say that's like the very basics of it. The very basics. Um, that's where the seed really, really was planted. So, yeah, it was our relationship when we started dating that I mean, everything else, you know what it's like being young and in love and all that sort of thing. Like, everything else gets parked, like you're just enjoying being together. You just want to like be around each other, do stuff together, and you're just not interested so much in the future as much as you are in the present. I think there's something really, really beautiful in that. So, so we were young. I look back now, I just go, I don't know how Jacob said okay. It's crazy. So I asked for his daughter's hand in marriage when I was 18. And that was a whole experience. Um, yeah, it was pretty funny. He certainly made sure that he wanted to know about what are my plans. And, dude, I was so ill prepared. I was not ready for this. And this again just goes, man, like I can't believe you said okay. And I remember having the conversation with him, and he was saying to us like, well, are what are your future goals? What do you want to do this? What do you want to do that? How about this? And all these different aspects of my life. And I just kept saying to him, I was like, mate, don't know, don't know, don't know, don't know. I don't know. And just constantly like just poor answers. And I remember for whatever reason, it got to the end of our conversation after just being grilled by this man. Here I was like 18, like I barely know what I'm doing with my life, obviously by way of answering the question so poorly. And he at the end of it, he said to me, he just like it goes dead quiet as Jacob does, looking you straight in the eyes, and he just said to me, I was like, oh no, he said to me, he's like, okay. And I'm waiting and I'm waiting and I'm waiting, and he's waiting for my response, and I just go, so what's the answer? And he said, well, I just said okay. And the relief, God, just this relief that I had. And this smile and this bubbling up of just like, when you're in a pressure cooker and it's just like this intensity, and and you just don't know what the outcome's going to be, and then all of a sudden you get the outcome you want, and it was just this like relief and this overwhelming like joy, and I was like, oh no way. And I was like, you said like you're good, and he's just like, well, I just said yes. I was like, right. I was like, he's like, well, do you want it in writing? And I remember distinctly being like, yeah, that'd be really nice. And so then that kind of started. He had a few caveats, right? And one of them was Beck needs to finish her apprenticeship, which I think, being young and in love and all these sorts of things, you think, oh, who cares about the future, and rah, 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 like so present focused and all these sorts of things, and there's certainly there's a beauty in that, But I think the wisdom of old age. I remember read a book recently called Fallen Leaves, and in Fallen Leaves, Will Durant talks about the relationship between the old and the young, or the youth and the wise, and the zealousness of the youth is necessary to push civilization forward, and the wisdom is necessary to reel the zealousness back in, and they conflict and they push back, and it's necessary, and that struggle is what keeps things alive while also moving forward, which I would say is part of life. I think you're either moving forward or you're not. And so even in that dynamic, there was that moment where I was in my head, I was just like, like we're in love, it's fine, we'll work it out, who cares? And I think that part of that's true. But also the wisdom is, if we just decided to throw caution to the wind and just do what we wanted to and start a new life together and all these sorts of things, well, we certainly wouldn't have had the foundation, much less the Beck wouldn't have. Maybe I don't know. What I was about to say then was Beck wouldn't have the pride in her skills had she not finished her apprenticeship, of which then carried into our business now. So yeah, so obviously he had a few caveats around our relationship, and yeah, and I'm actually getting a faint memory now. I think. Oh no, that's right. Yeah, it was back when we were dating. Dude, I was such a good Christian boy. It was so funny, dude. I was like so Christian. I remember I really had my eye on Beck, and we would just keep meeting up. I'd meet her in Perth and all these sorts of things, and our relationship really started to flourish while I was over in New Zealand. So that's when I was 15. And I was chatting. I was, just chatting with her over Facebook and Messenger and all these sorts of things, and I didn't realize. So dialing back even further, actually, I remember came back for mid semester break, and I was in the car. She had her P plates and I didn't, and she was dropping back because I was still technically Josh's friend, her older brother. I was still technically her older brother's friend, and I just kept conveniently making sure that we got to spend time together. And she was dropping me back, and again, very conveniently, I brought up the topic of relationships, and funnily enough, like I always tell this story, she said to me, oh, she was like, oh, I want to end up marrying someone who, like, I kind of know, but I kind of don't, and I'm in the passenger seat. And I remember we were at the Gateacre. Those who are familiar with Kalgoorlie, there's the Gateacre intersection, and I was looking out there. I was looking through the front windscreen, and she said to me, she was like, I mean, imagine if I married someone like you, like how much that would suck. And classic Beck just says it exactly how it is. And I remember just my head went like this. I was looking at the front and I was like, oh. And I just looked out the side window until I got home. Like here's this girl that I've just had it bad for so long, and she just completely crushed my dreams. It was so funny. But this is the interesting part. It's exactly what I needed. It was the letting go of that. Like I was trying so hard to make a good impression and to all these sorts of things, and it was the act of having my hopes with her dashed. Stop, is when I stopped putting on the face and I actually started just doing and saying and joking and being who I really am, and then she ended up falling in love with that guy. So in a roundabout way, it's just that's what was needed, which is really interesting. And I always think around that, it's this whole act of surrender and letting go is really what's required from people or from all of us. So yeah, so then that was midway through the semester when I was over in New Zealand. So I went back, or halfway through the year or whatever, the mid year break. So I went back and I just didn't care. I just spoke with her and I said what I wanted to, and she was just, I didn't realize this till later, but her mum would be with her during her apprenticeship breaks, and Beck would just be chatting with me and just laughing and giggling and all these sorts of things, and I was just entertaining the conversation. I'd given up on us being a thing, and it wasn't until we got back that she actually started really showing an interest, and that's when I was like, well, interesting. And obviously it eventuated in us, she was in Perth and I was in Kalgoorlie, and so we'd often go back and forth, and I'd go stay with her, and then we'd come meet halfway, and I'd visit her while she was in town and all these sorts of things, and we that's kind of how our relationship flourished. Yeah, and we would just be forever, always in conversation and making excuses to go any opportunity that I had to go down to Perth, any course, anything, I'd go down to Perth as often as I could. And it was a great time. Yeah, and so I think going back to the whole being a super Christian boy, that I went when we were really starting to date. I went and met up with Jacob, and I was just like, "Hey man, who's a dad? Hey man, I want to date your daughter," and he's just like, "Nah," straight off the bat, and I was like so despondent. No, we've got a photo of us sitting at Hammond Park, where Bec and I are sitting together, and it was maybe 10 to 15 minutes after that, when Jacob had said to us like, "There's no way you guys are dating right now." Yeah, it was about 10 to 15 minutes after this photo is taken, and it's so yeah, it's nice to have those memories, but yeah. Anyway, so then it goes back to, okay, well, we continue to date, and I think there's that trust built from between Jacob and I, and the fact is, like, I didn't just want a girlfriend, and this is probably the religious aspect of the upbringing coming in here, is that my intention was, if I'm going to be dating someone, I'm dating them with the intent to marry. It doesn't mean that, hey, we're dating and I'm going to slap a ring on your finger straight away, but it's like, the whole way along, I'm vetting. I'm like, is this a woman I want to spend my life with? And this was at the age of like 15. And I was willing to call it if it wasn't, and there was a very, very short relationship with a girl that I worked with. I think I must have been 14 at the time. And, it wasn't the right call. It kind of worked out that actually, she's not the one I really want to bother investing in, as bad as that sounds. Sounds quite crass, but really, ultimately, I didn't want to invest my time and energy any longer with her, so we called it. And that was, for the most part, dummy's falling out of his mouth. For the most part, that was a lot of guidance from my parents too, being like, is this really who you want to be with? And we were all kind of seeing the red flags, and yeah. And I'm really, really glad we made that call. Whereas with Bec, there wasn't any red flags. There were times I was like, it's like an orange flag, where I'm like, oh, that might piss me off, and they did. But for the most part, like, I think the character is the thing that we're really looking forward to, that we're looking for. So yeah, so then we got, so 18, I proposed, which is madness. I look back now, I'm like, it is genuinely madness. I'm 31 now, so 13 years ago. That's crazy. That is crazy. And yeah, and then I think that's when our life really started. Like, our journey as a couple really started. Obviously, yeah. So we got married about 18 months later. No, about 12 months later. No, it was less. I think it was 9 months. Yeah. Doing the right Christian thing, obviously. Like, if you're going to be sleeping together, you best be getting married. And so, like, funnily enough, on that, actually, we hadn't actually slept with anyone. We were both virgins when we got married, which I find very, very rare nowadays. Yeah, and truth be told, even with all the trips to Perth and all these sorts of things, like, we hadn't slept together. Tempting, no end of temptation. But, in my mind, my thing was that I didn't want to have her believe that her value in my life was because of what her body could offer me, and that I wanted the whole package. I wasn't just after a sexual release, and I'm glad I made those decisions. Hard, definitely, but yeah. So that's kind of where it really began. We got married and spent a few more months in town. I think about 3 or 4 months, and then we were both. A lot of people had said to us, when you get married, go establish yourselves. Don't be around the family. Don't do your thing. Like, you guys be a couple, go somewhere else and learn how to stand on your own too. So that's what we did. And best decision of our lives. So that's when it started. So I'm going to park that one there. So that's, I guess, the preamble up to us really doing our thing. Yeah.